When you saw signs along the road, what countries were they from besides the Malaysian sign?
So a lot of Japanese, electronics companies, I guess also like copy companies.
Richard, what's this?
This is the government guest house. This is where we stayed in Hanoi. And I don't actually, when we arrived in Hanoi, I'm not sure if we knew where we were going. Our minder was going to basically take us to where our lodging was for while we were in Hanoi.
Jacqueline, how can you describe these quarters?
Well, the Army guest house has about 20 rooms, I guess, 3 floors with the restaurant on the 2nd floor. Each suite has 2 good-sized bedrooms with a living area and a bathroom, and it wasn't very clean. It was dampy. The air conditioning didn't work very well. In my bathroom, there's this lime green tub with a pink toilet, and water's coming out of nowhere at all times.
Wherever you wanted around the city, they charged us the equivalent of $1 US, and most of the drivers spoke pretty good, well, broken English. And they were so friendly. I mean, I can't say enough about how friendly they were.
This is our first night there, and Greg Gursky, you know, a lot of people's reaction when they think about the fact that we were pedaled around Hanoi by another human being, they react negatively to the idea. Is this, what kind of a job is this for somebody that lives in Hanoi?
I'm not sure. I don't know if it would be well-paying, but
Well, we paid them $1 an hour.
Well, I would think so. Only if there's a lot of tourists. I don't know what if they were charging us an astronomical sum, being $1, which didn't seem like much to us, but was obviously a lot to them, because every time we'd come out of the hotel or anywhere, there'd be drivers fighting for us to come ride on their cyclos.
Well, I talked to one of the drivers, and they said that they usually make around $18 US per month, and it costs $200 US to buy the cyclo.
And we did learn that $12 a month or thereabouts was an average wage.
Right, average wage.
So they make a little bit better, like 50% more money than the average. This is at night, our first night in Hanoi. Jim Mills, did you have a reaction to Hanoi? I mean, one of the things that you noticed right away is there are no cars on the street to speak of.
No street lights. I think I saw one street light the entire time I was in Hanoi. It was very surreal in many ways. I was having a hard time trying to figure out exactly what I was experiencing at the time, but very dark. It's bringing back memories now, looking at the footage.
We're showing this footage because even though it's not the greatest television footage you've ever seen, it's exactly what it looked like. And how long did we do, Richard, remember how long we took this ride? First night?
Yeah, for the first night we were out on the cyclos for about a half an hour. Because we went through it, we kind of said, just drive. Just take us around town.
What's the temperature at this hour of night?
Even at this hour of night, it still had to be in the upper 80s, and the humidity was still present. The only times that I think the heat went away was the very early morning and maybe in the middle of the night.
The Metropole Hotel is a new French hotel. It's a joint venture with Vietnam where the rooms are all full. And those rooms, was there a number, is it a 3 or 4-star hotel? It's the only one like it in the city.
Yeah, at least a 3. It could be a 4.
It's an old hotel that used to be run by the Communist Party and where all the government guests stayed, and now it's a commercial venture. And those cyclo drivers are dressed better and differently than the average in the city.
Brian, what was your impression the first time? You had been to Vietnam before, not to Hanoi, obviously.
And I didn't say that earlier. I was there in 1970 for just a week, and I was not fighting in the war at that time. I had been in the Navy, but at that time I was on a short trip over there, and I'd never been to Hanoi. I guess, and I know Richard and I were walking around Hanoi one morning looking at each other saying, can you believe what we're seeing? And I don't mean that negatively. It's just, it's so different than anything I've ever experienced that it's hard, even on tape, to give you the exact impression that we had. What is missing in this tape that if you were there you felt that you don't feel looking at it?
The noise. Yeah. The noise is much louder. When these drivers ride us into traffic at street corners, you would see us just going to traffic, and you'd never know if someone's going to hit you. But luckily, people stop. That's my impression of this ride.
They had their own hierarchy of who had the right-of-way. It's sort of, well, the bicycle gave way to the cyclo, and that gave way to the motor scooter, and the motor scooter gave way to the car, the very infrequent car that came by. As you can see, you hardly ever see a car.
Very few stoplights?
The stoplights that were there it seemed like they were only manned at certain times. If there was such thing as a rush hour, it just seemed like early in the afternoon, I should say early in the evening.
Jacqueline, had you gotten the impression that they'd seen many Americans?
No, actually, that's the other thing. During this ride, a lot of people stared at us.
What about
I don't
you?
think they think
You're
we're
Vietnamese.
Americans.
What did they think of you?
Well, I was around you guys, and they thought all of you were French.
You could understand Vietnamese.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
And so you heard them say things like...
And they kept asking me, are they French? And I said, no, they're Americans. I think it's because the French, it was a French colony, so there are actually a lot of French tourists in Vietnam. And you know, since you guys don't have, you know, darker skin, black hair, they automatically think you're French.
Once in a while, they'd ask you if you were Russian.
Once in a while, they ask you if you were Russian.
What did they think of the Russians?
They did not like the Russians, which this blew my mind because we were at war with Vietnam, obviously, and the Russians fought with the Vietnamese, and they hate the Russians, and they seem to like the Americans. That may be overstating it, but that's the impression you get.
Working on a bicycle there, one of the things you see along the way are stands for air and repair of bicycles, like you would in a commercial enterprise here in the United States, an auto shop.
Yeah, I was amazed at how many things, such as bike pumps, and when we would be by markets, even at night, how simple things were. Whether it be someone cutting meat on a street, whether it be a barber cutting hair on the sidewalk, hair falling onto the sidewalk. It was literally stepping back in time, and it's easier to see that during the day probably than at night.
One of the things that you heard people say that were familiar with this country and the future, and I know they said it to me, is that you better take a good look at this town, Hanoi. And by the way, Saigon's a lot different because you'll never probably see it like this for much longer. Because if the trade embargo is ever lifted and cars are ever sold in this community at any great lengths, it will change it dramatically. What's this lake? Does anybody remember?
Sword Lake.
Big lake in the middle of town?
Right in the middle of town. Hanoi, it's not very big. The whole town surrounds by this lake. It veers off to 4 sections. The section that we stayed in was the oldest section of the Sword Lake, and it's about, I would say, a 10-minute walk from our guest house.
Jim Mills, how long were we in Hanoi?
We were in Hanoi, 4 days, I believe, and then we flew down on Air Vietnam to Ho Chi Minh City for another 4 days or so.
Some people said before we got there, don't fly Air Vietnam. Why did you fly? Why did we fly Air Vietnam? And what was it?
You're watching Vietnam Revisited on C-SPAN. Hanoi means the city inside of the bend of the Red River. Ha means river, Noi means in or on the inside. It was chosen to be the capital of Vietnam in 1010. Vietnam Revisited continues in a few minutes with author James Arnold discussing the history of the country. But first, a look at the sights, sounds, and faces of a recent early morning in Hanoi.
today. This is in the city of Hanoi. This videotape was taken back in April. And when you're there visiting, they refer to this as the possibility of a place where the Americans might return someday. At what time in our history would Americans have been in this embassy?
We were there at the end of World War II. We had not quite diplomatic relations, but we had a consular presence in Hanoi. This is in Hanoi, you say?
Yes.
Yeah. And then when the French returned to Hanoi, we maintained our presence there. And then we left when...
Or Ho Chi Minh City, as it's now called. When was the North and the South divided politically?
This came about as... That is the presidential palace we're looking at? That's interesting, because that was just let me add that was a target during the Tet Offensive in 1968, the decisive battle of...
This country. What makes him different than all the other leaders?
Because, great exploit that he has done for the country.
And after you go into this mausoleum, what else do you do? Are there other things that you can see around this area?
Yeah, you can see around this area. You can go visit the wooden house where the president was living, and you can see the presidential palace near here.
Vietnam became the 149th member of the United Nations. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, with per capita income of $130 a year. Blue-collar workers in Vietnam earn about $30 per month, while professionals earn half that much. Vietnam Revisited continues in a few moments with an interview with No Ba Tang, Law Commission Chairman of the National Assembly. She'll talk about relations between the United States and Vietnam. But first, some street scenes of the former French Quarter in downtown Hanoi, around the Sword Lake.